Helen, a 79-year-old woman, abandoned by her only son and left to live out her days in a nursing home, had long resigned herself to a life of loneliness. Yet, one fateful morning, she made a decision that would change everything. No longer willing to wait for someone to rescue her, Helen found strength in herself, reaching out to the world she had once known and discovering a renewed sense of purpose. As she set out to give back, she proved that no one is ever truly alone, and it's never too late to reclaim the life you deserve. But what happens next will shock you. In the quiet corners of a nursing home, where the scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint hum of life support machines, there sat an elderly woman named Helen. At 79, her frame was frail, her hair thin and silver. Her eyes, once sharp and full of life, now held a depth of sorrow that only age could bring. Helen had once been full of stories and laughter, a vibrant woman who had spent decades caring for her family. But those days were gone now, replaced by solitude and the daily monotony of nursing home life. Helen's story was one of abandonment. Her son, Mark, had placed her in the nursing home 5 years ago. He had promised to visit, to call, to check in. But over time, his visits became less frequent, until eventually they stopped altogether. Helen spent her days in the company of strangers, other elderly residents, who, like her, had been forgotten by their families. At first, Helen was devastated. She could not understand why her son, the boy she had raised with so much love and care, could turn his back on her. But as the months turned into years, she found herself adjusting. She became close with the other residents, forming bonds that helped ease the loneliness. Still, there was always that lingering ache in her heart, a constant reminder of how abandoned she had been by her own flesh and blood. One particularly dreary morning, as Helen sat in the common room, staring out the window at the dreary sky, she overheard a conversation between two of the nurses. They were discussing the upcoming plans for the holiday season and who would be spending the holidays with family. The conversation was casual, but it struck a nerve in Helen. It was the first time she had heard the word family in what felt like forever, and it made her wonder what had happened to hers. Her thoughts were interrupted by one of the nurses, a young woman named Sarah. Sarah had become somewhat of a friend to Helen over the years. She would often sit and chat with her, offering comfort when it was needed most. "Good morning, Helen," Sarah greeted her with a smile. "How are you today?" Helen sighed, looking up at her. "Oh, you know. Just the same. Another day in paradise." Sarah chuckled softly. "Well, at least we have some entertainment today. The new piano player is coming to perform this afternoon." Helen managed a small smile. "That sounds lovely. I suppose I could use a little distraction." As Sarah helped her into her wheelchair, Helen's mind wandered again. It had been years since she had heard from Mark. She couldn't remember the last time he had called her. And when she thought about it, she realized she couldn't even remember the last time they had spoken face to face. He had stopped visiting so long ago that she had become accustomed to the silence. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Maybe it was her own self-worth, or perhaps it was the yearning for love and connection that seemed to have vanished with each passing day. Later that afternoon, after the piano performance, Helen found herself in her room, alone again. The other residents had gathered in the common area to discuss their plans for the upcoming holiday. But Helen had no plans. She hadn't seen her son in years, and she had no other family to spend the holiday with. For a brief moment, she let the sadness wash over her. But then, something inside her clicked. She realized that she didn't have to wait for others to define her worth. She didn't have to wait for a call or a visit from someone who didn't care. She could create her own purpose. She had spent so much of her life waiting for someone else to give her meaning. But perhaps it was time to take matters into her own hands. Helen sat up in her chair, determination flashing in her eyes. She wasn't going to let the rest of her life be defined by her abandonment. She wasn't going to wait around for someone who didn't care. She would find a way to give herself a purpose, to make a difference in the world again. The next morning, Helen made a decision. She would leave the nursing home, but she wouldn't leave just to escape. She would leave with a plan to do something meaningful, something that would remind her of who she was before all the years of neglect and isolation. It wouldn't be easy, but Helen was determined. She began making calls, contacting old friends, and reaching out to anyone she knew from her past. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew she had to try. The people she had once cared for, the friends she had lost touch with, they could be her bridge back to the world outside the nursing home. The first call she made was to a woman named Mary, a dear friend from years ago. They had shared many memories, including their love for volunteering and helping others in their community. Helen had always enjoyed giving back, and she remembered how much joy it had brought her. Mary's voice on the other end of the line was a welcome sound. "Helen, is that really you? My goodness, it's been so long. How are you?" Helen smiled, feeling a surge of warmth at the sound of her friend's voice. "I'm doing as well as I can, Mary. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I realize that I haven't been the person I want to be. I want to make a difference again." There was a pause, and then Mary responded, her voice filled with surprise and encouragement. "Helen, I knew you'd find your way back. What do you need? I'll help however I can." Helen felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt as though she was not alone. She wasn't abandoned. She had people who cared, even if they were far away. Helen's plans started to take shape. With Mary's help, she began gathering donations, organizing drives, and reaching out to local charities. She found herself surrounded by new people who valued her, people who saw her for who she was, not the woman sitting in a nursing home waiting to die. She discovered a new sense of purpose in helping others, and through that, she began to heal herself. She was no longer defined by her abandonment. She was defined by the difference she was making. As weeks passed, Helen found herself more and more involved in her community. She volunteered at local shelters, organized food drives, and even started a small fundraising campaign for families in need. Her actions didn't go unnoticed. People were inspired by her strength and resilience, and they began to admire the woman who had once been forgotten. Eventually, Helen's story made its way back to her son Mark. He had been living his life, caught up in his own world, never realizing how much his absence had affected his mother. When he heard about her involvement in the community, his heart sank. He had been so focused on his own life that he had neglected the one person who had always been there for him. Mark reached out to his mother, not knowing what to expect. When he called, Helen answered the phone with a voice that was stronger than he had ever heard it before. "Hello, Mark," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Mom, it's been so long," Mark said, his voice filled with regret. "I'm so sorry. I've been terrible, and I know it." Helen took a deep breath. "You're right, Mark. You've been terrible, but I've learned something important in all this. I don't need you to take care of me. I can take care of myself. I've found my purpose again, and I'm doing things I never thought I could." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then Mark spoke, his voice tinged with emotion. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so proud of you, Mom. I wish I could have been there for you." Helen's heart softened, but she knew that forgiveness didn't mean she had to let him back into her life right away. She had built a new life for herself, one where she was not defined by his absence. But perhaps in time, they could rebuild what had been lost. As the years went on, Helen continued her work in the community, and her story spread far and wide. She became an inspiration to many, a symbol of resilience and strength in the face of adversity. She proved that no matter how old you were or how alone you felt, it was never too late to make a difference, to find a purpose, and to be valued. Helen never gave up on herself, and in doing so, she showed others that no one should ever feel abandoned or forgotten. And perhaps, just maybe, that was the most unexpected thing of all.